Hello and welcome to the Storyboard special, The Conversation Twitter Trends 2022. I'm Shibani Gharat. Twitter Trends report captures the themes and interests that are shaping consumer behavior in the global and the Indian market. And this year's Twitter Trends report dives deep into what's now, what's next, and what lies in the future. This year, the report found three biggest movements emerging to the top of conversation. Finance goes social, fans build worlds, and entrepreneurship hits peak culture. To tell us more about it, we are joined in by Preetha Atre, Director Global Business Marketing, APAC Twitter. And to speak more about global trends that have emerged from the research, we are joined in by Lisa Cowie, Global Head of Twitter Trends. Lisa, Preetha, welcome to CNBC TV18.
Thank you so much, Shibani. A pleasure to be here as always.
Lisa, let's begin this conversation with you. In 2021, Twitter Trends report is drastically different, from the 2022 report. What has really changed and shifted in the last year, if you can throw in some light on that?
Yes, and it is quite different. So there's so much happening on Twitter. So we've just been focused on surfacing the most pertinent conversations, the ones with the most energy. All those themes that we talked about last year, so things like well-being and tech, are absolutely still relevant. But in 2022, we set out to distill that further, really just to showcase three big trends, so just three big ones, really the movements of tomorrow. So we're focusing a bit more on future-facing trends, the ones that are driving culture forwards. And that's really how I like to think about the conversation on Twitter. It's a reflection of culture, but it's also a driver of culture. So this year we introduced a more advanced methodology, not just to surface conversational trends, but to apply prediction over that. So we did this by looking at patterns, so looking at things like long and short-term growth, as well as that volatility over time. So whether that conversation is driven by peaks and troughs, whether it's more stable, and that really kind of all comes together to tell us what we think is now, what we think is next, and what we think is sort of the things to watch in the future, which is really interesting to think about those sort of interesting corners of Twitter or the whispers that indicate where things could be going. So the trends themselves are very different from last year, but what's consistent is us really leaning into our most important asset. That's the people on the platform and those millions of everyday tweets.
Yeah, correct. Also, over to you, Preetha. Can you talk about the key findings that have emerged for India and what type of conversations are you witnessing? I believe, as I mentioned earlier, finance goes social, fans build the world, and entrepreneurship hits peak culture have been the key trends that have emerged. So if you can also share in some light on that, and what are the type of conversations around these that you have witnessed?
Yeah, for sure, Shibani. So like Lisa said, this year we've looked at the research from a very different lens, more predictive, more from a future lens. So we all know that India is a very diverse country with many languages and cultural nuances. So any piece of research that we do has to be done keeping this in mind. We also know in many ways that the biggest movements start quietly, an idea becomes a conversation and then becomes a major cultural shift. So in this year's report, it is designed to look at the most important aspect of Twitter, the people who use it on a daily basis. And we looked at the trends from a global lens before synthesizing this for India. And also, what does this mean for brands specifically in India? Because that's more critical for us. So the three trends, like you mentioned, that emerged. Firstly, let's talk about finance going social. This trend reflects Indians' growing interest in learning and sharing about investments, markets, and all things money. And I would say that investing has truly entered the timeline and the chat. We're seeing an increasing number of individuals, experts, and people coming onto Twitter, sharing their knowledge, their personal experiences as they go through this financial journey of theirs. And we've also seen a lot of brands and organizations also coming forth to engage with this leaned-in audience and community. If you look at the next trend, fan-built worlds, we all know that fan communities have been prevalent for many, many years. But today, these communities are now at the front and center of conversations. Fans today no longer just follow their celebrities. They're in fact leading the discourse in many ways while making their rules and also building value for themselves and their communities at the same time. We like to say that fan-built worlds are truly here to stay. And in fact, as more and more people go online in India, these worlds are set to become more inclusive, powerful, and central to consumer culture. And last but not the least, entrepreneurship hits peak culture. Building a business has never been more exciting, and having recently emerged as the third largest unicorn ecosystem in the world, startup culture in India is truly booming. And on Twitter, we've seen founders building communities along with their own personal brands, inspiring a whole host of new, more diverse entrepreneurs who are starting their journey. So it's a lot about people coming onto Twitter, sharing their experiences from a personal lens, and also encouraging others to be a part of this conversation, making it more inclusive and diverse. And we're seeing this play out in multiple ways on a daily basis.
Correct. Thanks for sharing these insights about the India market, Preeta. Over to you, Lisa. You commissioned this study across different markets around the world, across global markets. If you can share some light on what are the key global trends that have emerged, and are they interconnected in some way? What are the similarities?
Yes, we've done this work across 14 different markets. So a huge operation to really sort of start from the local first perspective. To sort of be authentic to each market, but then we've been laddering that up. And what's really interesting is actually the universality of trends. So when we're analysing tweets at this kind of scale, we do see similar shifts across the world, actually. So finance as a topic has exploded everywhere. It's not just mentions of crypto, that's a big part, but not just that, but it's a wider dialogue on investing, banking, earning, what the future of wealth building, or just even what everyday finance looks like for the average person. And certainly markets are at different maturities with that. We're just starting to see a bit more scrutiny and skepticism in some places. But really what's happened everywhere, and this is very consistent across all the markets that we looked at, is that a once very closed off topic like finance that was almost, boring even to a lot of people, has opened up and become much more accessible because it's intersecting with culture, entertainment, things like gaming. So that was the trend that we found to be most universal. But also fandom, whilst it's very local at its core, and with local kind of fandoms, there's actually something pretty consistent there too, in that fandoms are often global in nature because they're not always confined to one geography. So we've just found that fans everywhere are gaining more and more power. They have a voice. They even have a stake in fandoms. So some of the things that we've found in other markets is that fan tokens have become such a huge part of being in a fandom, where people want, almost like a monetary stake or a part of that fandom, not just to love the thing they love, but to get something back in return.
Yeah.
And then something else we've seen that's kind of bubbling away in India, but it's sustainability and the environment and climate change. We've called that trend the Great Restoration in some markets like the US, the UK, and Canada. That's definitely bubbling away in India too, like I said. It's certainly not a new topic, but there's very much a shift in how people are talking about the environment, how they're talking about climate change, and there's sort of an intersection there with well-being when they're sort of converging together, which is interesting. But we definitely couldn't ignore the massive growth in conversation around entrepreneurialism in India. And we've actually seen that in other markets. We've talked about that in the context of creator culture. So now feels like the time for India. The creator culture movement's sort of been going on for a little while now, but it's a real turning point at the moment for the market, a real cultural shift happening, particularly with women becoming integral in that space. So we're just sort of seeing India follow some other markets really, and sort of seeing how important creators and just everyday founders and entrepreneurs and sort of innovators are in that market.
It is time for a short break. On the other side, this conversation. Welcome back to this Storyboard special, The Conversation Twitter Trends 2022. So what should brands take away from the trends emerging out of the Twitter Trends 2022 for their campaigns coming up in the next few months, especially around the festive clutter? We are finding out in this segment. Over to you, Preetha. You know, one of the themes that I found really interesting was finance goes social. If you can explain to us what are the sub-themes that have emerged under, this finance goes social? Because, over the last 2 years of the pandemic in a market like ours, we have seen a lot of focus has shifted towards finance, with the kind of uncertainty that the pandemic also brought in. Many who were, disconnected or disinterested with their day-to-day finances have also become suddenly interested, on investing, on, getting into newer finance and money-making avenues. If you can share, what are the sub-themes that have emerged under Finance Goes Social, it will be fantastic.
Yeah. Like I said, there's a lot of interest that has come in India, especially in the last 2 years, around this whole conversation and topic. And while we've seen this as an upward trend, India is still at a nascent stage when it comes to investing and trading, but it's certainly growing. Just to throw some numbers, we've seen a 185% increase in year-on-year conversations around discussions on financial literacy and a 62% increase in discussions around just finance in 2021. So what we're seeing is Indians are keen to learn about the world of money, and they're turning to Twitter where discussions around financial literacy, mutual fund investments, digital payments, so on and so forth continue to rise. Most of the conversations are primarily centered around everything from seeking out or giving advice to encouraging each other to invest in the process and, making the conversation more accessible and inclusive. But most interestingly, this isn't all about just investing. Digital assets like NFTs inject a layer of culture and art into investing. And communities around these digital commodities create hype, truly signifying a convergence of pop culture and finance. When we speak about sub-themes, some of the things that we have observed in terms of what's happening now, we're seeing the rise of digital finance and Web 3.0 literacy. What we do see as coming into the future is finfluencers for financial freedom. And what we also watching play out is finance meets culture. So certain conversations to watch out for: NFT plus Bollywood, Bollycoins, financial literacy, decentralized finance, fintech startups, Web 3.0, multitude of conversations. And like you can see, they're all quite diverse, and from novices to finfluencers to fintech enthusiasts, we're seeing a variety of people riding the ups and downs of the stock market and financial investing conversations. And many of them are taking to Twitter to share their experiences. And these conversations are, in a sense, becoming more accessible. And we're also seeing a lot of brands leaning into this trend and realizing the true opportunity as to where they can be part of the conversation. Some of the quick things that we see brands doing is an opportunity to educate and teach consumers about the whole financial literacy and how they can go about investing. We're also seeing brands kind of making people aware of risks, that it's not all something that they can do on their own. They need to be aware, they need to be educated, they also need to be aware of the risks that come along with investing. We're also seeing brands champion underrepresented voices and helping people upskill. One such brand, in fact, Amphi, has been leveraging Twitter quite often to promote and inculcate financial prudence and the advantages of investing early. So yes, from financial literacy to stock markets to NFTs, we're seeing a whole variety of conversations coming through.
Yeah, and speaking from a brand, speaking about a brand campaign, Lisa, if you can elaborate, how have brands leveraged this Twitter Trends report globally? How are they using it to their benefit?
Well, we see a lot of brands just having an appetite for this kind of insight, where it kind of leads them into strategies and planning as it's sort of an upstream way of thinking about consumers and really considering how they connect authentically, how they can kind of jump into these kind of trends. So a couple of examples we've seen. Coinbase earlier this year, they jumped in at peak time with a big crypto push around the Super Bowl. Sort of a massive splash, but they got that timing just right because finance had just exploded, become way more mainstream, and they picked that right moment to reach a mainstream crowd. So a really simple bouncing QR ad sent Twitter crazy. The conversation was crazy that night and the next day. So just a good example of sort of a finance brand jumping in there. Another great example is Samsung. Actually converging two trends. We see them really leaning into crypto, but also fandom. So they developed a partnership with a metaverse platform, Decentraland, and created a sort of virtual replica of their brick and mortar store where fans could shop using crypto. So really thinking about the sort of interconnectivity there of trends and how they can reach fans in interesting ways.
Interesting that you say that. Also, another interesting trend, for the India market was definitely fans build worlds. And Preetha, you briefly spoke about that, and we have seen in the tech space how there are these massive, tech communities that are formed, that are fans actually of the products or of the brand. If you can talk about the increasing role of the fans in today's day and age, in building brands, Preetha.
Yeah. Like you said, this is one of the most interesting trends that we've seen emerge. And, global, local, regional, subcultural. In fact, there's a fandom for everyone on Twitter. And this is one of the things that the Twitter Trends report celebrates. We're also recognizing the massive influence that fans are bringing to the discussions and the discourse in India. From cricket stands to Kollywood fans, Indians on Twitter are not only today supporting their favorite celebrities, but they're also there for each other. Collaboration is a key, and they're also looking at fostering a sense of belonging. So from creating content to driving donations for a cause, fans are also finding unique ways today to participate and help the artists and creators achieve success. Like I said, fandom is not a new phenomenon, right? It's been there. But what we're seeing is the role of the fan that has evolved and is evolving. And today they are in the front and center of the conversation. So from towns to cities to states, they're becoming more vocal and more influential. So be it global fandoms like K-pop to smaller subcultures, Twitter in many ways is also giving a voice to the fandom and helping them create an impact. We've seen a 47% increase in discussions in India about fandom and a 55% increase in conversations around cricket Twitter. Just to give you an example, we've seen 105 million tweets around cricket just in the past year, and this number is growing. So what do we look at from a trends perspective in terms of what next? What we're observing, especially in India, is local voices getting louder. This in many ways is a reflection of the way people are choosing to consume content and the kind of content that's coming through. With the rise of local streaming platforms and more diverse content in the last few years, we're actually seeing many local fandoms and subcultures emerging. And this, in fact, is kind of bringing out the diversity that's prevalent in India. And it's also bringing a lot of regional voices to the national stage. So from a brand perspective, it's also quite interesting to see how brands are now engaging with their fans, because we're seeing many brands, in fact, embracing the fact that today's fans are part of their brand. And it's a very good thing. It's great to celebrate people and communities who love your brand and product and bring them closer to your brand. And that's exactly what you're saying, that we're seeing play out, especially in the tech space. We also urge brands to reimagine their collaborations and also seek out niche fandoms, because while we're aware of the biggest fandoms that have the loudest voices, but the smaller niche fandoms can often align with the brand values, bringing more relevance. So we've seen that with Samsung, like Lisa spoke. Samsung in India leaned towards the BTS community to release a special limited edition phone. And just a couple of weeks back, we also saw OnePlus India get fans involved as part of their OnePlus 10T launch event by turning fan tweets into tweet confetti. So we've also seen streaming platforms like Amazon Prime Video and Netflix India regularly lean in and interact with fans across the country, especially the South cinema fans. So in many ways, the role of the fans is constantly evolving, and brands are recognizing this and also constantly evolving in the way they are interacting and working with these fan communities.
Finally, before we go, Preeta, sticking with you, what are the key takeaways, that brands should walk away with from, this particular Twitter Trends 2022 report, and how will it help them design their future campaigns?
Yeah. We all know we are all entering the festive season, and this is top of mind for the marketing community as they plan for the festive season coming ahead. So at Twitter, in many ways, we've seen how conversations can make a difference. And the Twitter Trends report this year explores not just top conversations, but also deeper into how brands can build relevance by being a part of this. So it's important for brands to follow conversations on Twitter, because this will help them gauge the sentiment of their consumers much better than any pie chart or bar graph. We also see that the speed, the variety and depth of conversation can give brands an outsized advantage as they look at launching any new product or building cultural relevance during the festive season. Also, we, in many ways and in many researchers, have seen that conversations can drive purchase decisions both online as well as offline. And it's critical for brands to be a part of the purchase decision and the purchase journey of the consumer. So they have to look at building a full funnel strategy that will intercept the consumer along their journey. And many of them have successfully used the Twitter powerful suite of ad solutions to drive people to buy. So in a nutshell, what we would also say is that positive conversations are especially memorable, and brands can leverage Twitter's leaned-in audience by teasing upcoming launches, creating that added buzz, and also converts to inspire in many ways and drive intent. In fact, today, social brand conversations are the new reviews, and brands need to be a part of this to succeed in this festive season. So I would like to conclude by saying brands should converse to convert.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us, Lisa. Thanks for joining us, Preeta.
Thank you so much, Shivani. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
With that, it's a wrap on Storyboard this week. You can catch all of our content on Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. Thanks for watching. We will be back same time next week. See you soon.